Shooting USA is brought to you by SnapSafe and the full line of Trek-Lite lockboxes. Affordable security for home or travel. Get 15% off with code SUSA15 at snapsafe.com. They're here. 96 years of primary service rifle history. The collection represents continuous improvement forged from experience in battles following the end of the Civil War and the end of the muzzle-loading percussion rifle. And it all began with an ingenious creation to make use of those surplus percussion rifles after the war. After the Civil War, it was this rifle that once and for all brought the American Army out of the age of muzzle-loading muskets.
It's simplicity in itself. You just load the trapdoor, that's where it gets its name. Put a cartridge in, close it, cock it, and you're ready to fire.
No doubt it was much faster to use than the cap and ball service rifles it replaced. But oddly enough, rapid fire was not the original priority behind the trapdoor concept. During the Civil War, soldiers in the heat of battle had a dangerous tendency to load multiple rounds into their unfired muskets. After the Battle of Gettysburg, 12,000 discarded weapons were found to be jammed with anywhere from 3 to 10 charges apiece. In 1865, the United States looked to the Springfield Armory for a solution.
After the Civil War was over, they had tons and tons and tons and tons of these Civil War muskets. They tried to figure some way to convert their existing muzzleloaders to the more modern breech-loading system using a self-contained cartridge.
Inventor Erskine Allen, master armorer at Springfield, developed what came to be called the Allen conversion. He simply cut away part of the rifle's original breech and replaced it with a hinged trapdoor mechanism. Over the next 8 years, Springfield produced tens of thousands of Allen conversion rifles.
The trapdoor ended up being a superb system. The first gun that came out was in .58 rimfire. Then the later models were in .50-70, and then in 1873 they reduced the caliber to .45-70, which is a very, very good military round.
In its new caliber, trapdoor production went from conversion to entirely new rifles. Once adopted, it became the American Army's first general-issue breech loader. As America grew, the trapdoor became a legend in the western frontier with the likes of General George Armstrong Custer and Geronimo. Despite being a single-shot rifle, the trapdoor served the U.S. Army well, with over 700,000 produced. But as the 20th century approached, the arrival of smokeless powder changed everything. The single-shot black powder rifles of the world were obsolete, and the U.S. knew it had to adapt. They chose the design of Norwegian rifle makers Ole Krag and Erik Jorgensen. Their rifle wasn't quite state-of-the-art, but it was good enough to bring the United States into a new era.
Krag Jorgensen is the first smokeless powder, bolt-action, magazine rifle, which is adopted by the U.S. military.
The American Krag was adopted in 1892, went through several variants in both rifle and carbine versions. Superbly made gun, just superb gun, made at Springfield Armory. Wonderful, wonderful piece of machinery.
The most distinctive feature of the Krag was the hinged gate that covered its magazine. A soldier would simply open the gate, drop 5 rounds into the magazine, close the gate, and the rifle was ready for action. For the first time, U.S. troops had true repeating firepower as standard issue. It was also chambered in .30 caliber, a new U.S. specification that would not change until the M16 in 1962. Another first came in 1898 when the Krag became America's first rifle of empire.
And so these weapons were then placed into the hands of troops who were no longer fighting Indians, but now fighting Spaniards in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines.
The Spanish-American War would put our new rifle to the test, but not all U.S. troops going into the conflict would carry a Krag.
Only the regular forces had enough of these weapons, and volunteers for the war were still carrying the old trapdoor black powder 45-70 rifles.
The one notable exception was the first United States volunteer cavalry known as the Rough Riders, under the command of Teddy Roosevelt. But as good as the Krag was, it lacked one small innovation that the enemy's rifles did not.
When the U.S. troops were coming up against Spanish Mausers in the Spanish-American War, the Spanish Mausers could be loaded via 5-round stripper clips. So they could top their rifles up much faster than we could dumping individual rounds into the side gate of the Krag.
And with that, a simple metal strip had rendered the Krag Jorgensen obsolete on its first time in battle. Right away, the U.S. set out to replace the Krag.
This weapon was a stopgap. It helped us transition from black powder to a magazine bolt action.
By the start of the 20th century, America had become an international military power. But the hard lessons learned with the Krag in its one and only war would not be forgotten by the designers of America's next primary battle rifle. For many, the Krag became symbolic of America's first venture as an international power, as suggested by a popular song of the time. Underneath the starry flag, civilize them with a Krag. But the Krag would have the shortest service of any primary arms. Coming next, the 03 Springfield.
The .22 Advanced Rifle Cartridge easily outperforms all other .22 caliber cartridges in its class, producing .22 250 performance in an AR-15 platform. The .22 ARC is engineered to take full advantage of the most aerodynamic .22 caliber bullets. This means tighter groups, increased accuracy, and an exceptional shooting experience. .22 Advanced Rifle Cartridge from Hornady.
By the beginning of the 20th century, our military knew the next U.S. service rifle would have to equal the arms of any foreign power. After studying innovations from around the world, engineers at the Springfield Armory designed the rifle that would be the finest on the battlefield. In June of 1903, America's primary service rifle officially became the United States Caliber 30 Model 1903, better known as the 03 Springfield.
I think it is probably, certainly aesthetically, the most gorgeous military bolt-action rifle ever made. And it's certainly, if not the best, darn close to it.
The 03 Springfield was America's response to the rifle that had bested the Krag during the Spanish-American War.
We saw in the hands of our enemy, the Spanish soldiers were 7mm clip-fed Mausers made in Germany. And so we decided we needed some of that action too.
Springfield incorporated some Mauser design features into the 03, but most important was the 5-round stripper clip, a small but key feature of the .98 Mauser that had cost American lives in the previous war. But the 03 had innovations of its own. Its shorter 24-inch barrel was just as effective as any long rifle, but short enough to eliminate the need for a carbine version.
Prior to that time, we had long versions for infantry and short versions for cavalry. The 03 was the first one that would be issued to both troops.
But when its original .30-03 cartridge was improved, in 1906, the rifle really came into its own.
The 30-06 round is one of the legendary cartridges in all of history. It's a wonderful military round, and it's got tremendous knockdown power. It's just a terrific round.
The 03 in 30-06 was truly a world-class battle rifle. It was amazingly accurate, fast, rugged, and powerful, and in the following decade, it became legendary.
Sailors and Marines carried it ashore in Veracruz, Mexico in 1914. Pershing's troops carried these, the cavalry and the foot soldiers, into Mexico in 1916. And this is the weapon that the U.S. regular Army troops and National Guard were armed with when the United States declared war on Germany in 1917.
In the trenches of World War I, the 03 Springfield was a prized possession for troops lucky enough to carry one. But its days of battle didn't end with World War I. Simpler to produce variants like the 03A3 and the 03A4 sniper version carried the rifle through World War II, Korea, and beyond. In 1903, Springfield's rifle brought America up to speed with the militaries of the world. But in 1936, the M1 Garand left them all behind.
The M1 Garand is simply a superb weapon. It's one of the great firearms of all time. Not just one of the great battle rifles, one of the great firearms.
It was the product of a decade and a half of trial and error for the eccentric French-Canadian engineer, John Garand. Working with the Springfield Armory, Garand devised his gas-operated masterpiece for the U.S. government. Rifle designers of the day were striving for speed, power, and volume of fire. The Garand had all three. Its en-bloc clip fed 8 rounds of powerful 30-06, and above all, it was semi-automatic. All a soldier had to do was press in the clip and pull the trigger. Adopted by the government in 1936, it became the U.S. rifle caliber 30 M1, but the world knew it as the Garand.
The United States was the only major power whose troops were primarily issued with a semi-auto frontline battle rifle.
And the Garand came just in time for American GIs about to face the greatest conflict the world had ever seen. But it would take time to build and field enough Garands after Pearl Harbor. So while the 03 would soldier on in the early battles of the war, America's manufacturing might put the Garand into high-speed production. That part of the story is next. Shooting USA is brought to you by Les Bear Custom and the Les Bear Gunsight Pistol, honoring a tradition of superior firearms training with the world's finest 1911. As the Nazi Reich battled the Allies in World War II, it was widely believed that German weapons were in many cases the best in the world. But there was one very powerful exception to that, the M1 Garand that the average American GI was carrying as his primary issue service rifle.
The U.S. was lucky in World War II being armed very simply with the finest frontline infantry rifle of the war. No question about it. No lesser a person than the General George Patton called the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised. It was an absolutely superb weapon.
With the M1, John C. Garand created what the rest of the world could not, a tough and potent auto-loading rifle that was primary issue for the average infantryman. It was loved by the GIs and envied by the enemy.
The American GI had a tremendous advantage with this. I don't think there's anybody in World War II that wouldn't rather had one of these than an Arisaka or a Mauser.
Another advantage for the GIs was American industrial might, with Springfield and Winchester cranking out M1s at peak capacity. In January of 1944 alone, Springfield produced 122,000 Garands, averaging about 164 per hour. By the end of the war, the Garand was serving in all theaters of operation. The M1 soldiered on through Korea as well, and at the end of its production, almost 5.5 million had been made. But by then, the military had already decided what America's next battle rifle should be. In 1959, the U.S. rifle caliber 7.62 millimeter M14 replaced the veteran Garand as the U.S. standard issue. And for the first time, America's primary service rifle was capable of full auto fire. Still, the M14's lineage was unmistakable.
It's basically the M1 improved. It does use a number of features of the M1. Most obviously the rotating bolt and the rear sight setup. The most obvious feature is that it had a 20-round detachable box magazine.
To reduce the weight of those 20 rounds, it was chambered in the new 7.62 millimeter NATO cartridge, also known as the 308. But for the U.S. government, the real goal was a single rifle that could replace most of the small arms used on a platoon level.
The M14 was intended to replace the M1, number one, the BAR, the M3 grease gun. It was fine as a replacement for the M1, but it was not really a great gun in full auto.
Nevertheless, it was the M14 that initially armed our troops in the jungles of Vietnam.
They found the gun performed well in Nam. They especially liked the 760x51 cartridge because it just cut right through the brush and all the jungle and whatnot. But one of the main problems was the walnut or beech stocks had a tendency to swell up.
And as a multi-role firearm, the M14 proved less than adequate. It was too unwieldy for thick jungle terrain and too light to be effective in full auto. Still, many soldiers admired the M14 and were not anxious to give it up for the strange new rifle that started replacing it in 1967.
The bottom line is, M14 as a battle rifle was a darn good gun. It's a shame that it didn't have a longer lifespan.
The M14 marked the end of an historic era as rifle stocks of birch and maple gave way to fiberglass, plastics, and polymers. But as advanced and effective as today's combat rifles are, they owe their proud heritage to America's primary service rifles of the past.
Thanks again for tuning into the Shooting USA YouTube channel. We hope you enjoyed the content. A couple of notes. Make sure you take advantage of SUSA15 at snapsafe.com. That's our discount code that saves you 15% on anything from SnapSafe, and that gets to be some big money when you start talking about modular safes and vault doors. Also, if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our new content. As always, a like and a comment helps us with that algorithm.